Civilians under fire in Ukraine, Syria, and Yemen. Doctors begging for food in Ethiopia's war. 1 million Rohingya people from Myanmar forced into exile by an army killing spree. There are also children used as soldiers, girls forced into early marriage, businesses destroying the environment, people targeted for their religion, sexual preference, or skin color. These horrible things are still going on around our world. So is anyone watching and investigating and trying to do something? This is the job of the United Nations Human Rights Council, based in Geneva in Switzerland. Like our world, it's far from perfect, but it's the main international body for human rights, and it carries some clout. So, what is it, and what does it do? The Human Rights Council was created in 2006 to replace the widely discredited and highly politicized Commission on Human Rights created after the Second World War. The Council's mandate is to promote and protect human rights according to the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The first session of the Human Rights Council took place in June 2006 at its headquarters in Geneva. It reports directly to the UN General Assembly in New York. The Council consists of 47 member states, which are elected on an absolute majority by the other member states in the UN General Assembly, usually after much lobbying. Members are elected on the basis of regional blocs. 2022 Council President Federico Villegas of Argentina talked to us about the President's role.
Every time we have a session of the Council, the role of the President is to make sure that all the elements are there to have a successful session. And of course, in particular issues, we can, as President, engage with all members and all stakeholders, and even the independent experts, the High Commissioner and NGOs, to make sure that this common understanding is the primary atmosphere in the Council.
The Human Rights Council meets at least 3 times a year and can also hold special meetings to discuss crisis situations. Formed of states, it also has input from civil society and independent experts. It has mandated independent investigators and rapporteurs to look at human rights in countries like Syria, North Korea, Myanmar, and South Sudan, as well as issues like torture, freedom of speech, the right to a clean environment, and the rights of disabled people. The Human Rights Council's resolutions are not legally binding, but carry moral authority. Countries do not like to be criticized. So the Human Rights Council is a political body subject to global tensions such as US-China rivalry and Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which can play out in its sessions. Is this a problem? It is at least a challenge, according to Council President Villegas.
We see some signs in the present situation and the tone of the debates that might give us a warning that we have to do something very quickly to recover the spirit of the creation of the Council, which was precisely a platform of dialogue, common understanding, to address the human rights situations of every single country of the world, not of only a few, like it used to be for 50 years, the former Commission of Human Rights, and that we achieved. We have the Universal Periodic Review, by which UN member states, 193, put their human rights situation on the table, and they get recommendations, comments, criticisms, and suggestions by other member states, by NGOs, and the diagnosis by the High Commissioner and by independent experts. That was never the case for 50 years in the previous organ we had.
Sometimes the Human Rights Council's hands are tied by the UN structure and internal politicking. It has often been criticized, not least by the former Trump regime in the United States, which called it anti-Israel, hypocritical, and a cesspool of political bias. If the Human Rights Council calls for tough action, like referring Russia, Syria, or Myanmar to the International Criminal Court, this ultimately comes up against the UN Security Council, where permanent members, the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK, all have a veto. Although less powerful than the Security Council, the UN General Assembly can suspend members from the Human Rights Council. In April 2022, Russia became only the second member ever to be suspended over its war in Ukraine. The Human Rights Council can and does speak out. In the absence of courts to try crimes in countries like Syria and Myanmar, it has set up mechanisms to gather evidence for possible use by future courts. In March 2022, it set up a commission of inquiry on violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Ukraine. And as the director for Human Rights Watch says, its investigations may not always or even often lead to immediate change, but they do ensure no one can say they didn't know.